There's a huge difference between the original Mary Shelley Frankenstein and the Frankenstein popularized by movies and TV. Well, more huge differences than one singular difference. There's a lot different. In this book, Frankenstein, the graphic novel, original text version, follows the former, the original 1818 novel, published by Classical Comics and written by Mary Shelley. As you can probably tell, original text version takes excerpts straight from the novel. And I say excerpts because this book obviously doesn't include word-for-word transcription of the novel. But anyways, the adaptation of the original novel is done by Jason Cobley and Joe Sutliff Sanders and penciled by Declan Shalvey. So back to my original point, there are huge differences between Mary Shelley Frankenstein and popular Frankenstein. Most are familiar with the latter and will probably be kinda surprised by how this story goes. Victor Frankenstein, a son of a Genevan nobleman, leaves home to study abroad, and being caught up in all kinds of sciencey thingamajigs, becomes obsessed with creating life. And then he creates the monster. Yeah, it doesn't really look like how it's so often portrayed. And it doesn't just moan and groan, it talks. But what follows is essentially a revenge story being told from the point of the view of the revengee. And in that regard, this comic adaptation really made the story much more interesting than the original novel. Obviously, there's a lot of boring exposition and description left out, instead being translated into the fairly solid and polished artwork, but the condensation of everything really gives the story much more clout. The inclusion of actual images to relate to the events certainly helps create that feeling, and despite the lack of extreme action, enough is put into points where I hadn't even thought of it being because of the nature of the novel. And that's really my whole attitude towards this book. I wasn't sure how well a comic book adaptation of a relatively boring 1818 novel would sit with me, but it really was an interesting read and actually increased my respect for the novel itself. The themes presented in the novel, such as to what extent we should take scientific experimentation, are obviously a little more diluted, but they're still there. Now, I'm not really sure who to recommend this to, but I would think that those who have read the novel, even those who found it boring, might enjoy this one. Other than that, I suppose anyone should read this, especially if you want to get the story without having to read a whole novel, or if you want to see what the original idea behind today's popular Frankenstein is actually like. You could even get the book in quick text version, an abridgment of the abridgment, or other comic adaptations of literary classics from classical comics.